The story begins on a quiet evening in downtown Los Angeles. Sandra Bullock had just finished a long charity event where she spoke about education for underprivileged children. She smiled and shook hands with many people, but inside she felt tired. Her shoes were heavy, her thoughts scattered, and all she wanted was a moment of silence. She stepped into the hotel lift, pressing the button for her floor, and let out a quiet sigh. But just as the doors were about to close, a hand gently stopped them. It was Keanu Reeves. He looked the same as people always described him: calm eyes, kind smile, and a simple presence that carried warmth. Sandra looked up, surprised but happy. She had not expected to see him tonight. As the doors closed, the lift hummed softly. For a brief moment, there was silence, but the kind of silence that feels heavy. The light inside flickered once, and the lift suddenly stopped between two floors. Sandra's body froze. Her breath grew fast. She had always felt uneasy in closed spaces, and the sudden stop made her heart race. Keanu noticed immediately. He did not panic. He did not raise his voice. Instead, he bent slightly so his eyes met hers and said in a gentle tone, "It's okay. We're safe. These things happen all the time. We'll get out soon." His words were calm, but his eyes carried something deeper: reassurance. Sandra pressed her back against the wall, trying to slow her breathing. She whispered, "I hate when this happens. It feels like the walls are closing in." Keanu stepped a little closer, but not too close, giving her space. "You're not alone," he said softly. "We'll get through this together." The way he said "together" made the small space feel different. It was no longer a trap. It became a place where kindness filled the air. Sandra looked at him, her eyes softening, and for the first time in those tense minutes, she felt her shoulders relax. But then the intercom crackled, and a security guard's voice came through, explaining that there had been a power glitch. They would need to wait for engineers. It might take some time. Sandra's hands tightened again. The thought of waiting in this box for even 20 minutes felt unbearable. Keanu noticed her struggle. Instead of distracting her with meaningless words, he shared a story. "Once I was stuck in a subway tunnel in New York. It was dark. People were scared. But then one person started humming a song and slowly everyone joined in. We forgot the fear because we felt connected. Sometimes all it takes is a voice, a reminder that we are not alone." Sandra listened. She could picture that scene, strangers in the dark united by a small song. She smiled faintly. "What did you sing?" she asked. Keanu gave a quiet laugh, the kind that warms the heart. "Honestly, it was a silly song about sunshine, but it worked. Maybe we should try it here." For a moment, Sandra thought he was joking, but then she saw the honesty in his face. It wasn't about the song. It was about bringing light into a dark space. She shook her head, smiling more now, and said, "You really know how to turn a lift problem into something human." Suspense lingered in the air. The internet would later call this moment the pause of kindness, because what happened next was not about fame, not about Hollywood, but about two people sharing vulnerability in silence. Keanu slowly sat on the floor, his back against the wall. "Sometimes it's easier to wait when you're not standing," he said, looking up at her with gentle eyes. After a second of hesitation, Sandra joined him. Sitting down beside him on the cool floor, they sat together in that small space. And though the world outside did not know yet, this moment would soon travel across social media, creating headlines, photos, and endless discussions. But inside the lift, it was not about the internet. It was about comfort, kindness, and the power of presence. As Sandra leaned her head back against the wall, her breathing finally steady, she whispered, "You always make it simple. You make people feel safe." Keanu did not reply with grand words. He only smiled and nodded as if to say that sometimes safety is not in promises but in presence. And in that quiet lift, with the soft hum of the stuck machine, two friends shared something unforgettable, a reminder that even when the world feels trapped, kindness can open a new kind of door. The lift stayed silent, except for the faint hum of the machinery. Sandra shifted her hands nervously on her lap, her mind racing through every uncomfortable memory she had of being trapped before. Keanu noticed her tension, but he didn't push her with questions. Instead, he kept his voice calm, as though he carried the stillness of an open sky right into the closed box. He asked her gently, "Do you remember the first time you were ever afraid like this?" The question surprised her. She expected him to talk about movies or make a light joke, but instead, he asked something real. Sandra closed her eyes for a moment, thinking back. "I was young," she whispered. "There was a storm and the power went out in our house. I was hiding under a blanket, feeling like the whole world disappeared. My mother lit a candle and told me to watch how even the smallest light can fight back the dark. But even now, sometimes I forget that lesson." Keanu nodded slowly, his eyes softening as if he was holding that memory with her. "Maybe tonight," he said, "you can remember again. This time, you're not alone under the blanket. We can hold the candle together." Sandra smiled faintly, her fear still there but lighter now, like a shadow shrinking from a flame. Then suddenly the lights flickered again, the lift jolted, and both of them grabbed the wall instinctively. Sandra gasped, her heart pounding fast. For a second it felt like they might drop. Suspense filled the air, thick and sharp. But the lift steadied, and silence returned. She leaned forward, whispering, "I hate not being in control." Keanu looked at her carefully. "Most people do," he replied, "but sometimes control is an illusion. What matters is how we face the moments when control slips away." There was a pause, heavy with meaning. Sandra's eyes glistened, though she tried to hide it. "You always find words that cut right to the truth," she said softly. "How do you stay so calm when everything feels like it's falling apart?" Keanu looked down for a long time before answering. His voice grew quieter, but each word carried weight. "Because I've seen what real falling apart looks like. I've been through losses that made a broken lift feel like nothing. When you survive those storms, you learn to breathe even when the walls close in." Sandra's breath caught. She knew his life had been marked with deep grief and resilience, but hearing him speak of it this way touched her heart differently. There was no self-pity, only honesty. She reached out without thinking and lightly touched his hand. "Thank you," she whispered, "for sharing that. It makes me feel less small right now." The intercom crackled again. The guard's voice explained that engineers were on their way, but it might take longer than expected because of another technical failure. The message ended with static. Sandra closed her eyes in frustration. "Longer?" she muttered under her breath. "How much longer can this go on?" Keanu leaned back, his expression calm, almost thoughtful. "Sometimes the waiting itself is the lesson," he said. "Maybe we're meant to be here for a reason tonight." She turned her head, curiosity mixing with doubt. "A reason? You think everything happens for a reason?" He gave a small shrug. "Not always. But sometimes, when life locks two people in the same space, maybe it's a chance to learn something neither could have learned alone." His words sank into her heart like water soaking into dry ground. Sandra felt her chest loosen, though her mind still wrestled with fear. She asked softly, "What do you think we're meant to learn tonight?" Keanu smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carries more questions than answers. Maybe that even in the middle of fear, kindness makes space to breathe. Maybe it's about remembering that we can carry each other's weight, even in silence. Suspense hung heavy again when the lift groaned suddenly, the cables rattling faintly above. Sandra froze, clutching her knees tightly. Keanu immediately spoke, not with panic, but with steady strength. "Look at me," he said gently. "Just look at me." She turned her eyes to him, and in that moment, she saw something rare. Not the actor, not the Hollywood image, but a man who carried storms quietly inside and still chose peace. His gaze steadied her heartbeat. They sat like that for minutes, the noise of the failing lift fading into the background. And then, unexpectedly, laughter broke out from Sandra's lips. It was shaky at first, but real. Keanu tilted his head, amused. "What's funny?" She covered her mouth, embarrassed. "Nothing, just if someone told me years ago that I'd be stuck in a lift, panicking, and it would be you calming me down, I would have never believed it. It almost feels like a strange script." Keanu chuckled softly. Sometimes life writes scripts that no one else could. And in that laugh, the tension eased again. They shared a quiet smile, and for the first time since the doors closed, the space felt less like a prison and more like a room where something meaningful was unfolding. What neither of them knew was that outside, in the hotel lobby, a small group of people had already noticed the lift was stuck. Whispers were spreading. Soon, someone would realize who was inside, and the outside world would begin to stir. But for now, the world outside did not matter. What mattered was the quiet truth between two friends, learning again how kindness can soften fear and how presence can make even the heaviest silence bearable. The hum of the lift grew louder as if the machine was breathing along with them. Sandra shifted slightly, stretching her legs against the cool floor. The silence between her and Keanu was not empty anymore. It carried weight, like two people quietly sharing stories without words. Suddenly, the lights flickered again, not once but 3 times before going completely dark. The small box was swallowed by shadows. Sandra gasped sharply, her hands instantly clutching the floor. She whispered, "Oh no." "Not again." "I can't do this in the dark!" Keanu reacted quickly. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out his phone, and switched on the flashlight. The small beam of light spread across the walls, soft but steady. "See?" he said in his calm voice. "We still have light. Even a small one is enough." Sandra's breathing slowed as her eyes focused on the glow. She whispered, "That's exactly what my mother once told me." "Even the smallest light fights the dark." Keanu smiled gently. "Then let's hold on to that thought. Maybe this is the candle she spoke about." They both stayed close to the light, but the suspense thickened when the lift shuddered violently again. A grinding sound echoed above them, metal rubbing against metal. Sandra pressed her hands over her ears. "It feels like we could fall any second." Keanu placed his hand softly on her shoulder, not to restrain her, but to anchor her. "Listen to me," he said firmly but kindly. "If that were going to happen, it would have already. The system has safety locks. Fear makes the sound louder than it is. We're okay." His confidence worked like a shield around her panic. She looked at him, trying to hold on to the steadiness in his eyes. To distract her, Keanu spoke again. "You know, sometimes I think lifts are like life itself. You don't control the cables, or when it stops, or when it goes up. But you can decide how you spend the time inside." Sandra tilted her head, her eyes still wet. "That's a strange metaphor," she whispered. Keanu chuckled softly. "Maybe, but think about it. Some people scream the whole ride, some people stare at the floor, and some people notice the stranger standing beside them and decide to share a moment. Maybe tonight is about the third choice." His words landed deep, making her feel something beyond comfort, something like truth. She wiped her face slowly and whispered, "You always manage to turn fear into something gentle. How do you do that?" He paused before answering, his eyes lowering. "Because I know what it's like to live with fear every day. I've lost people I loved. I've walked into rooms where I felt completely alone, even when they were full. When you face those storms, a broken lift becomes less about fear and more about remembering you can choose peace." Sandra's chest ached as she listened. She had faced her own storms too, ones the world rarely saw. Being an actress, being strong for everyone often left her hiding her quiet pain. Now, in this small, trapped space, she felt understood in a way that surprised her. The intercom buzzed again, a voice saying, "We're still working on it, Miss Bullock, Mr. Reeves. Please remain calm." The mention of their names made them both freeze. Sandra whispered, "They know it's us." Keanu sighed softly. "Then it's only a matter of time before the rest of the world finds out too." Her eyes widened. "You think the news will spread?" "Of course," he replied calmly. "Someone will leak it. Tomorrow morning, it'll be on headlines. Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock stuck in lift together. And everyone will make it sound bigger than it really was." Sandra laughed weakly, shaking her head. "Imagine the internet. People will spin stories we never said." Keanu nodded. "But maybe that's okay. Maybe the story doesn't have to be about fear. Maybe it can be about how two people found calm in chaos." But before she could respond, the lift shook again, harder this time. A loud clank echoed, and then everything went still. The sound was followed by silence so deep it made the air heavy. Sandra clutched Keanu's arm. Was that safe?" Keanu tilted his head, listening. His face grew serious. "That wasn't just the cables. Something else shifted." Her eyes widened with fear. "Don't say that." Please don't say that. I'm not saying we're in danger, he replied softly. I'm saying we need to trust the people outside are doing their job, but we also need to stay strong in case this takes longer. The tension built higher. Sandra's heartbeat raced so loud she thought it filled the room, but Keanu's voice cut through the storm. Look at me again, he said. She turned her head, her eyes locked with his. And in that stillness, a strange thing happened. The fear lessened, replaced by a quiet recognition. This was not just about a broken lift anymore. It was about trust, about being seen in her most fragile moment and realizing she wasn't facing it alone. Time stretched. 10 minutes felt like hours. And then, to break the silence, Sandra whispered, "You know what's strange? I've known you for years, worked with you, laughed with you, but I feel like I'm really meeting you for the first time right now." Keanu gave a gentle smile, his eyes soft. Maybe that's the gift of nights like this. Sometimes it takes the walls closing in for people to finally open up. Outside, footsteps and voices echoed faintly above them. The engineers were working, but neither of them knew how long it would take. What mattered was that inside the box, a connection was deepening. One built not on cameras or red carpets, but on honesty, fear, and kindness. The air inside the lift had grown warmer, heavy with silence and the faint buzz of electricity from somewhere above. Sandra rubbed her arms slowly, not just from the warmth, but from the weight of waiting. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "How long do you think we've been here?" Keanu glanced at his watch, but then lowered it without answering. Instead, he said, "Long enough to teach us something, not long enough to break us." His words were soft, but they carried a strength that seemed to steady her breath. Just then, a faint metallic sound echoed from the shaft above, like tools clanking against steel. Both of them froze, listening. The intercom sparked to life again, but this time the voice was less steady. "We're trying our best, but the main control is jammed. It might take longer than we hoped." Sandra closed her eyes, her head falling back against the wall. "Longer. Every time they say that, it feels heavier." Keanu leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Then maybe we shouldn't measure this time by the minutes. Maybe we should measure it by what we share while waiting." His voice pulled her eyes open again, and for the first time she noticed how calm his posture was. He wasn't forcing his calmness. He carried it like someone who had walked through storms and learned to breathe in the middle of chaos. To shift her focus, he asked, "What's the bravest thing you've ever done when you were afraid?" The question caught her off guard. She thought for a long moment before answering. "After my divorce, I was terrified of trusting people again. Everyone thought I was strong because I smiled on camera, but at home I felt broken. One day I chose to foster children. I told myself, if I can't trust the world for me, maybe I can still trust it for someone else. That was my bravest choice." Her eyes glistened as she spoke, her voice cracking. Keanu didn't interrupt, didn't try to cover her emotion with comforting cliches. He simply listened, nodding slowly, holding her words like they mattered. After a pause, he said, "That's more than brave. That's love in action. That's giving light even when you're standing in the dark yourself." The words sank into her heart. She looked at him, and for a moment she forgot the walls pressing in. She whispered, "And you? What about you? What's the bravest thing you've done when you were afraid?" He exhaled slowly, his gaze lowering. "Letting go," he said quietly. "There were people I loved who I couldn't save. Holding on to that pain almost destroyed me. But one day, I decided to let go. Not of their memory, but of my need to control what I couldn't change. That was the hardest and bravest thing I've ever done." Sandra's eyes filled with emotion, her throat tight. She whispered, "You carry so much, and yet you make space for others." Before he could answer, the lift suddenly shook violently, harder than before. Sandra gasped, gripping his arm tightly. The sound of grinding metal filled the air, followed by a loud snap above them. Both of them held their breath, expecting the floor to drop. But then silence returned, thick and heavy. The intercom buzzed again, and the guard's voice came through, this time nervous. "Please stay calm. Something slipped, but the safety brakes are still holding. Engineers are working on releasing the jam. We'll get you out safely." Sandra buried her face in her hands, whispering, "I can't keep doing this. Every sound feels like the end." Keanu leaned closer, his tone firm but kind. Listen to me. If this box wanted to break, it already would have. You're safe. Trust the brakes. Trust the people outside. And if that's not enough, trust me. His words pierced through her panic like a steady anchor. Slowly, she lowered her hands, her breathing uneven but calmer. To lighten the heaviness, Keanu reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded paper. Sandra blinked in surprise. "What's that?" He gave a small smile. "Notes I carry. Thoughts, quotes, reminders. Sometimes they help when the world feels heavy." He unfolded it and read aloud. "When nothing around you can be controlled, control how you choose to see it. Fear shrinks when faced with kindness." Sandra stared at him, her heart aching with admiration. "You actually carry that with you?" He nodded. "Because even I forget sometimes. Even I need reminders to choose calm." Her lips curved into a small, grateful smile. "Then maybe I should start carrying one too." The lift groaned again, but this time it was softer, almost like a sigh instead of a scream. They both looked at each other, sharing a silent understanding. The night wasn't over yet, and the waiting wasn't done. But something had shifted. The fear was still there, but now it was joined by a quiet strength, a sense that together they could endure it. What they didn't know was that outside, a growing crowd was gathering. Word had spread through the hotel. Staff whispered, guests pulled out phones, and someone had already shared the news online. The world beyond the lift was buzzing with curiosity, but inside, the two of them were wrapped in a fragile space of trust, honesty, and resilience. Sandra leaned her head back again, whispering almost to herself, "Maybe being stuck here isn't a punishment. Maybe it's a pause we didn't know we needed." Keanu nodded slowly, his voice calm and deep. "Sometimes life puts you in places you would never choose, just to show you what you never would have seen." And as the night stretched on, the lift became more than a trap. It became a mirror, showing them their fears, their courage, and the quiet truth of human kindness. The minutes inside the lift had turned into hours, though neither Keanu nor Sandra could tell exactly how much time had passed. The warmth in the small space had thickened, and the silence between them carried both comfort and tension. Sandra's head rested against the wall, her eyes half closed, when a sudden burst of noise erupted from the shaft above. Loud footsteps, metal clanking, and muffled voices calling to each other. Sandra's eyes flew open. "They're still working?" she asked, her voice trembling between hope and exhaustion. Keanu tilted his head, listening carefully. "Yes, and that sound means progress, even if it feels far away." His calm tone was like a steady drumbeat against the rising panic in her chest. But before relief could settle, a harsh grinding noise filled the air. The lift jolted again, this time harder than before. The floor vibrated under their bodies, and the flashlight in Keanu's hand flickered for a second. Sandra grabbed his arm, her nails digging in unconsciously. "Keanu, what if this time it really gives way?" He looked directly into her eyes, his voice deep and steady. "Then we'll face it together. No one is ever ready for fear, but no one has to face it alone." His words struck something inside her, not just calming, but reshaping her fear. She held onto his arm, her breath slowing as she focused on his steadiness instead of the sound of the cables. The intercom crackled again, and a different voice came through. This one belonged to an engineer, more direct and less rehearsed. "Mr. Reeves, Mrs. Bullock, we know it's been long. The main brake is stuck. We may have to force the doors and pull you out from between floors. Please be prepared. It might be uncomfortable." Sandra's heart jumped at the words "between floors." She whispered, "That sounds dangerous." Keanu's face stayed calm, though his jaw tightened slightly. "Dangerous doesn't always mean impossible. Trust them. They've done this before." But before either of them could respond, another sound echoed. Faint voices below, and then a cheer. Sandra frowned. "What was that?" Keanu listened, then gave a quiet sigh. "That's the crowd. Word must have spread. People are waiting outside." Her face paled. "Oh no." "The cameras," he nodded. "Yes, by tomorrow morning, this will be everywhere." Her chest tightened with a different kind of fear now, the fear of headlines, The loss of privacy, the twisting of a simple night into a media storm. She whispered, I don't want them to see me like this. Fragile. Afraid. Keanu leaned closer, his expression gentle but serious. Listen to me. They'll see what they want to see, but what matters is what's real. And the truth is, you've been stronger tonight than most people ever are. Don't let their headlines steal that truth from you. Her eyes filled with tears, but this time they weren't only from fear. She whispered, You really believe that? I do, he said softly. I've seen how you fight for others. Tonight, you're fighting for yourself, and that's the hardest fight of all. The lift groaned again, interrupting their moment. Then came a loud bang from above, followed by the screech of metal being pried open. Dust sprinkled down from the ceiling, making Sandra cough lightly. Keanu held his flashlight higher, shielding her with his arm as debris fell. After a few tense minutes, a voice shouted down the shaft. We're almost there! Just hold on! Sandra leaned her head into Keanu's shoulder, whispering, I don't know if I can handle them pulling us through a half-open space. He looked down at her, his voice soft but steady. Then don't think of it as them pulling you out. Think of it as you stepping into the next chapter. Sometimes the only way out of fear is through it. His words carried a quiet strength that settled inside her chest. She nodded slowly, her breathing calmer now, but then another unexpected twist came. The intercom crackled once more, and a manager's voice said, Please be advised, the press outside already knows who is stuck. Reporters have gathered. Once you're out, it will be public. Sandra's eyes widened. It's already out? Keanu gave a small, weary smile. Of course. The world never misses a story like this. She covered her face with her hands, whispering, I can't do this. I can't walk out there looking like this, shaken, broken. Keanu gently pulled her hands away, holding them in his own. His voice was calm but firm. You won't walk out broken. You'll walk out human. And sometimes showing that is stronger than pretending to be perfect. Her lips trembled as she whispered, But they'll twist it, won't they? He nodded slowly, maybe. But let them twist. You can't control their story. You can only live yours. The depth of his words struck her harder than any headline ever could. She realized then that her fear wasn't just about the lift, it was about being seen without her mask of strength. And yet, in this small space, with Keanu beside her, she felt more seen than ever before. The grinding above grew louder, followed by a sudden burst of cold air as the ceiling hatch cracked open slightly. A beam of light shone down, blinding them for a moment. Voices called out, We see you! Stay calm, we'll get you out. The suspense inside the lift reached its peak. Sandra gripped Keanu's hand tightly, her voice trembling. When those doors open, everything changes. He squeezed her hand gently, his calm eyes meeting hers. Maybe that's exactly what's meant to happen. The noise of tools and shouts filled the space again, growing louder, sharper, closer. The rescue was near, but so was the storm waiting outside. And yet, as Sandra looked at Keanu's steady face lit by the small beam of his phone, she felt a strange calm wash over her. Maybe, just maybe, the world could see them not as untouchable stars, but as people who leaned on each other when the walls closed in. The final minutes inside the lift felt like hours stretched into eternity. The grinding and clanking of tools echoed above, metal bending, voices calling down, and flashes of light breaking into the dim space. Sandra held tightly to Keanu's hand, her breath uneven but steadier than before. Her heart raced with two fears at once. The fear of being pulled into the unknown space above and the fear of the world waiting outside. A voice finally shouted, We've got the hatch open. We'll lower a harness one at a time. Please stay calm. Sandra's fingers tightened against Keanu's. She whispered, I can't go first. Please, you go first. Keanu shook his head gently, his voice calm but firm. No, you first. I'll be right here watching. I promise. Her lips trembled, her eyes filling with tears. What if I freeze halfway? Then I'll remind you to breathe, he said softly. And if you fall, I'll catch you. But you won't. You're stronger than you think. Before she could argue, the harness dropped through the small opening, swaying slightly in the air. Two engineers leaned down, their voices steady, guiding her. Keanu helped her stand, steadying her legs. "You've already survived the worst of tonight," he whispered. "This is just the last step." With shaky hands, Sandra let the engineer strap her into the harness. She looked down at Keanu one last time before they lifted her upward. Her eyes met his, and he nodded with the calmest smile. Slowly, the harness rose. Sandra's heart pounded as her body squeezed through the narrow opening above. Her breath grew fast, her chest tightening. "I can't," she whispered, panic creeping in. Keanu's voice rose from below, calm and strong. "Yes, you can. Just breathe. I'm here." His voice was an anchor, pulling her through the storm inside her chest. Step by step, the engineers guided her, and finally, she was pulled fully out of the lift. The room above erupted with cheers and relief. Sandra collapsed into the arms of the crew, tears spilling down her cheeks, but for the first time that night, they weren't only from fear, they were from triumph. Moments later, the harness came back down for Keanu. Unlike Sandra, he didn't hesitate. He let them strap him in, then looked up calmly. Before rising, he called out, "See? Told you we'd make it." Sandra's lips curved into a trembling smile as she leaned over the opening. Her hand stretched down as far as she could reach. Keanu rose steadily, the same calmness on his face. And when he finally climbed out, he didn't celebrate loudly or bask in the cheers. Instead, he walked straight to Sandra and held her hand, as if reminding her that the story wasn't about escape. It was about enduring together. But the moment they stepped into the corridor, flashes of cameras lit the air like lightning. Reporters had gathered, their voices shouting questions, their phones raised. "Keanu, Sandra, what happened inside? Were you scared? Tell us the truth. Are you two more than friends?" The chaos of questions crashed around them. Sandra's chest tightened again, her old fear of headlines returning. She looked at Keanu nervously, but before she could speak, he stepped forward. His voice was steady, his words simple. What happened tonight wasn't about fear. It was about kindness, about remembering that even in the smallest space, when everything feels heavy, we can still choose to be there for one another. The crowd quieted slightly, their cameras still flashing but their questions slowing. Sandra stepped forward, her voice soft but firm. "We weren't just two actors stuck in a lift. We were two people facing fear and finding comfort in presence. Maybe that's the part worth remembering." The words spread quickly. Within minutes, social media filled with posts. Headlines popped up. Keanu Reeves comforts Sandra Bullock in stuck lift. Kindness in chaos. A friendship that inspires millions. But for the two of them, none of that mattered. What mattered was the quiet truth they carried out of that lift. Later that night, away from cameras, Sandra sat with Keanu in the hotel lounge. The lights were low, the noise far away. She whispered, "I don't think I'll ever forget this night." Keanu smiled faintly. "Maybe we're not supposed to. Sometimes the hardest nights leave behind the clearest lessons." She looked at him, her eyes soft. "And what's the lesson tonight?" He leaned back, his gaze thoughtful. That walls can trap us, fear can test us, and the world can watch us. But kindness always sets us free. Her heart softened at his words, and for the first time in many hours, she felt completely safe. Outside, the world continued buzzing, writing its own version of the story. But inside, between them, the truth was simple. They had faced fear, leaned on each other, and walked out not just as friends, but as reminders that humanity's greatest strength is compassion. And though the internet couldn't stop talking about it, for Keanu and Sandra, the story was never about the headlines. It was about the silence in the lift, the calm voice in the storm, and the kindness that turned fear into something unforgettable.